Hi everyone, my name is Irene Biolchini. I am an Italian curator working mostly with contemporary art. Today I'm going to go around the Museum of Ceramics in Faenza and I'm going to show you some spaces in which I curated some shows throughout the years. More particularly, I would like to start today with a very dear show to me. That was the show of Alessandro Roma here at the International Museum of Faenza. Why I'm going to start with this project? There are many and yet various reasons why. One of the first, and I think the most important for all of us, is to show you as an example how many and yet different limitations and apparently, but just apparently, problems can transform themselves into instrument for creativity. My idea is that ceramics and his particular way of being a unique matter can enhance creativity. And therefore, I would like to explain you why I decided to work with contemporary art and ceramics. In fact, apparently, when you think about contemporary art, you usually, as a misconception, think about conceptual art or intellectual art, something very immaterial, something very limited in the ability of making. That's not true. Many artists are working with conceptual ideas, but yet are trying to touch the matter, to create something also in a physical way. Of course, ceramics is also linked with everyday life. It's very common, it's very linked and close to craft. And so, on the other side, it's also true that contemporary art, till some years ago, had a misconception of ceramics. So, the world of ceramics used to think at contemporary art as something far and distant, and on the other way around, contemporary art used to think about ceramic as something linked and connected with popular themes and everyday life. Fortunately enough, this misconception is day after day going to be definitely over. There are many contemporary artists working in the contemporary field with major galleries that are approaching art and approaching ceramics as a form of art for their own sculptures or paintings or whatsoever. On my particular side, what I tried to do was to describe this possible meeting between craftsmen, designers, and artists for the creation of a new culture of contemporary, of what is contemporary. And therefore, some years ago, I started a column entitled Gli artisti e la ceramica, therefore the artists and ceramic, showing how many contemporary artists were using this material and this technique. I think that there is a new open possibility to study and understand our contemporary world if we enter this open field that is ceramic. Because with ceramic, you are able to meet also craftsmen, also people working every day with ceramic. And if the artist meets this new kind of public and works with them, then new creation can arise. There is a sort of threshold that we have to understand, and we have to live there in order to create something new, a new space, a new area of possibilities and creations. And that's precisely the reason why I tried to focus my curatorial practice into this field, because I do believe that the idea of going towards a new public, but even towards a new idea of making, will change also the conceptual idea of the artist himself. Many times, working with ceramics, artists are free. They are entering a new field, something that is not so certain for them. And when you open yourself to the other, to what you don't know, then creativity arises. So for me and my curatorial practice, to work with ceramic and contemporary art means also to work with the idea of the encounter, to work with the idea of a new public, a larger public. And today I would like to show you how I tried to develop this approach. Come with me. When I met Alessandro Roma the first time in Milan, he explained to me how difficult it was to work with ceramic such in a huge and big city like Milan. And I think the same applies to many cities around the world. Working with craftsmen was becoming very difficult and very expensive. Plus, there wasn't such a big tradition of ceramics in Milan, and therefore Alessandro was trying to find villages that were more accustomed to the idea of ceramics. Of course, when we started talking about the importance of ceramic within his artistic research, because he conceives himself mainly as a painter, I suggested him to come and visit Faenza. He came, and after a tour of the museum that offers such big and contemporary spaces, he ended up in our heart, in the very core of the museum. In a special place, we used to do workshops with kids, and kids usually work with ceramic and create small pieces that then later on they bring back home. This program started very early, at the end of the 60s here at the museum. And when Alessandro saw the workshops, he felt something alive in there, and therefore asked the possibility of working in such an incredible and historical place. As you can imagine, in the workshop we have earth, we have clay, we have glazes, and we have kilns. But at the very same time, we have also limitations, because we are not a real shop, we do not have many workers, but there is one man, Dario, who usually works with kids in these workshops. Therefore, a painter like Alessandro, who worked a little with the ceramic before coming here, had to be autonomous in the creation, with the exception of the help of Dario. Of course, Dario was fundamental for the implementation of the project, but most of the time Alessandro was alone, trying to understand how to develop its own sculptures in ceramics. This limitation, apparently a limitation, on the other side, set him very free in the possibility of trying, of creating, of mixing, and more than that, every time that he was not very certain about what to do, he was free to take a walk and see our collection. Having this constant possible inspiration of the history of ceramics talking to him, and more than that, having also the resources of our photographic archive, or having the possibility of talking with our restorers, knowing more about technique, gave him a new approach towards the material. He decided to come here many times in order to produce the artworks, for some days, to take his own time, because he knew that ceramic has its own limitation. It has to dry, but he also knew that the kiln in here wasn't very big. we knew that the maximum size of the sculptures would have been 90 centimeters and not more than that. And so we knew since the very beginning that we were going to have a show with small, precious sculptures instead of big monumental ones. And therefore, Alessandro had to imagine a show in which small pieces had to convey the strength of his painting. As you can imagine, it was a very long run and a very long, continuous attempt to make better and better. The project as a overall took us almost 1 year, but the final result was something new for him and new also for the museum. Or to better say, it was a new way of having creatives producing directly within the walls of the museum. As a curator, I decided to try to make this experiment. It was challenging, of course, but it also gave me the possibility of working with a very historical place, and more than that, to work directly, slowly with an artist in the building up of the show, creating a human connection with the artist and interacting with the overall result of the project. Therefore, what at the very first beginning seemed a sort of limitation for us in a material way ended up in being a fundamental part for the final good result of the show. As you can imagine, the work was long, slow, but at the very same time allowed Alessandro this slow approach to really think about the sculptures, and this slow process really allowed myself to think about the final result. Therefore, what I do suggest is to work as much as possible with the history of the institution that is going to host a show. Talking with the history of the institution will give you the possibility of understanding the strength of such an institution, like in this case, the workshop that had an history. And at the very same time, what I do suggest as a curator is to involve the artist in the construction, in the building up of the show as much as possible. Finally, but I think it's a fundamental moment, if you invite an artist inside an institution, it's very important to involve all the personnel working in the museum to the construction of the show. Because in this way, what is going to be created is an integral part of the overall feeling of the population living on a daily basis the museum. This particular human approach, I think, will enlarge the final result and will engage also what we think about contemporary art. This beautiful place is the place in which the exhibition of Alessandro Roma took place. As you can see, there is a wonderful light and a lot of white and openness. So the biggest problem we had was how exhibit some ceramic sculptures that weren't that big in such a huge space. The major problem was to obtain a good concentration, a good focus upon the sculptures within such a open white. I discussed many times with the artist about possible options. We both knew that this was the perfect place for the exhibition because Alessandro Roma is mainly a painter, and for him, light is the most important element. So we knew that this light, this place, was the right one, but we had to adapt somehow the space to the sculpture, or vice versa. After many discussions, we decided to respect the natural attitude of the painter, and therefore we decided to associate somehow the ceramic sculpture that he was going to produce here at the museum with other big artworks that he was going to paint in his own studio. So what we did was to exchange ideas constantly while he was in Milan working at his studio. And at the end of the day, we decided to exhibit here some huge textiles that he was producing at that time. We decided, therefore, to create a sort of labyrinth within this open space, so to suggest to the spectator where to look. By doing so, the eye was conduced in a sort of corridor, and at the end of that corridor there was the ceramic sculpture. The textiles were many, and so we used them like in theater, creating small stages and combining them with the ceramics that Alessandro Roma was producing here. Again, how can you associate textile, so something so light, with ceramic, a true material work of art, with a matter, a very strong matter? We decided to play with this contrast between lightness and earth, matter. And therefore, we decided to encourage this movement of the textiles and to create color association between the textile and the ceramic. By doing so, the final display was very dynamic. And due to the dynamic of the show, we considered also the possibility of involving a performer. We started to imagine the possibility of a free person dancing in between this huge textile. And at the end of the day, we decided to make it happen. And so during the exhibition, there was a special evening in which Paola Ponti, a dancer who collaborated many times with the museum, danced in between Alessandro's textile. Here, at my back, there was a huge construction that we made, a big basement with the ceramics, and on top of that, a big textile moving very light upon sculptures. This idea of movement suggested initially the performance of Paola Ponti. And Paola visited the exhibition many times while we were installing it and also after. The exhibition, as we conceived it, didn't have a proper path. It was a circular exhibition, so you could enter and exit at any point, at any time. And it was this idea of freedom, of vagueness, of lightness that suggested certain movements to Paola. When Paola used to come here to practice, to study her own movements, and more than that, how textiles were reacting to her movement, she started to take small notes of her sensation, of the reaction, even of how the space was changing according to the light. And she started sending all these small considerations to Alessandro. And the artist started to reply. So the day of the performance, we decided to give to each and every spectator this private conversation between the two of them, in which the two of them were slowly building up the idea of the performance. So, while you were seeing Paola dancing within these very light textiles, you were also able to read how she felt while practicing. In overall, your own experience as a spectator was reflected in Paola's experience as a spectator, and she was giving body and soul to what, hopefully, you as a spectator were feeling. When you curate an exhibition, you are perfectly aware that there are some special architectonic spaces that will influence somehow the final result of the exhibition. What is interesting is that most of the time, what you consider as a minus or as a problem can transform itself instead in a special character of the show. In this specific case, the problem of such an open space inspired to the artist Alessandro Roma and to myself as a curator the idea of working with light, with movement, and after that inspired also their relationship with a performer, Paola Ponti. As you can see, therefore, there is nothing as a bad space or a good space, but there are bad ideas and good ideas, and working with them, you can obtain a fantastic result. The project with Alessandro Roma was a long journey. It took us almost 1 year to complete our process, from the first visit of Alessandro till the end of the exhibition. In such a long time, Alessandro Roma had the opportunity of visiting our archives, our laboratories, our staff. And the experience was also a strong human experience for him. Therefore, at the end of the exhibition, he decided to donate a work of art to the institution. And nowadays, in our permanent collection, we host one of the sculptures that were made during his period at our museum. As you can see, therefore, an exhibition can be also an important instrument for a contemporary museum in order to acquire new artworks, and also for an artist, because being here, it means also to be permanently part of a huge history, something bigger than yourself.